Hey, history fans, welcome back. Ever feel like you're missing pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the ancient Israelites and how they came to claim Canaan?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. A listener wrote in wanting us to take a deep dive on this.
it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. And specifically, they're curious about the origins of that claim and how it connects to modern-day Palestinians.
Right, so to really untangle all this, we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of sources, like what archaeology tells us, what the biblical texts say, and even some modern perspectives.
I like it. It's like we're historical detectives.
We are. And one of the first clues in this case is the size of the Promised Land. Like when you read about it in the Bible, it's huge.
Right.
Way bigger than what most people imagine.
Yeah.
It's not just a little patch of land. We're talking from Egypt all the way to the Euphrates River. That's like modern day Iraq. So that's a really important starting point for us. This giant territory, which was promised to Abraham and all his descendants, it includes a lot more than just Canaan. So the question is, why did history end up focusing so much on Canaan specifically?
Why indeed? That's the mystery we're trying to solve today. But before we get to the Israelites' arrival, let's rewind the clock even further back. I'm talking way before the pyramids, to the time of the Canaanites.
Right, we're talking like 9600 BCE.
Oh, wow.
These guys were already building cities that were like super advanced for their time.
Really?
Oh yeah, like way before the Egyptians were doing their thing. It's pretty amazing to think about how long they were thriving there.
That's incredible. I had no idea they were that advanced.
They were. Like, check out Jericho, for example. They found these giant walls and ramparts there, which tells us they had their act together. Very organized, very developed society.
So Jericho was like a bustling city back then.
Oh, yeah. But it wasn't the only one. They had a whole network of cities. And the Canaanites were really good at agriculture, too, using techniques that were, like, way ahead of their time. Irrigation, crop rotation, all that stuff.
Real innovators.
They were. And they were amazing traders, too. Their goods were all over the region. Plus, they had this rich culture and a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, is a big part of how they saw the world.
Right. That Canaanite belief system is super important because it really sets the scene for what happens next. The arrival of Abraham and the whole idea of the promised land.
Exactly.
So as the story goes in the book of Genesis, Abraham is like the OG.
Yeah.
He kicks off the whole story of the Israelites' claim to Canaan. And it's through him that God makes that covenant promising land, tons of descendants, and a blessing for all nations.
Exactly.
And like you said earlier, that land promise, it wasn't just some tiny territory. It was enormous, much bigger than just Canaan. But still, history seems to zero in on Canaan specifically.
Right. And that really makes you wonder, why? Why Canaan when they were promised so much more?
Such a good question. What could be the reason for that focus?
Well, let's hold that thought for just a sec, because before we jump into motivations, we need to look at how the Israelites actually arrived in Canaan, at least according to the Bible, that is.
Okay, let's do it.
So in the book of Joshua, it sounds like a pretty straightforward conquest. The Israelites just sweep through, defeat everyone, and claim their divine inheritance, like it was meant to be.
But is that the whole story?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky and maybe a tad contradictory, because the book of Judges, which comes right after Joshua, tells a different story.
Ah.
Yeah, in Judges, it seems like the conquest was a bit messier. They didn't fully take over everything. There was still a lot of conflict going on.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't as clean cut as Joshua makes it sound.
Right. And that really raises some questions, doesn't it?
Definitely. Like, was the conquest really as easy as Joshua says? Or was it more complicated, like Judges suggests? And could these different versions of the story be a clue to understanding why they ended up focusing on Canaan, even though the original promise was for a way bigger area?
It's definitely possible. I mean, if the conquest wasn't as decisive as they claimed, they might have needed a better reason to explain why they were in Canaan in the first place.
Right. Like maybe they had to emphasize their right to Canaan specifically, even within that larger promised land.
It's something to think about for sure.
Totally. So we've got this sprawling promised land, a thriving Canaanite civilization just doing its thing, and then the Israelites arrive with their own ambitions and claims. It's already a pretty tangled web, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is.
But now we got to add another layer, the connection to modern-day Palestinians. And that's where things are going to get really interesting.
You got that right. Buckle up, folks. We're about to go even deeper into the ancient world. All right, so picking up where we left off, We've been digging into this whole promised land idea and why they ended up focusing on Canaan when the promise was for a much bigger area.
Exactly. And we're starting to think that maybe the biblical account isn't like a perfectly objective historical record. Maybe there's some spin on it, you know?
Right, like maybe some human agendas and interpretations got mixed in along the way.
Exactly.
Which leads us to a pretty important point. Who actually wrote these stories, and how did their situation affect what they wrote? Remember that the Hebrew Bible wasn't written all at once. It's like a collection of different writings that people put together over centuries.
So there's room for like personal opinions, biases, even political stuff to sneak in, especially if they were writing during like chaotic times.
Exactly. Imagine you've got a group of people trying to take control of some land. What's a better way to make it seem legit than to say, hey, God told us to be here?
The classic God gave us this land argument.
You got it. And that's where things could get a little, well, creative with the storytelling, shall we say. If you can make it sound like God's totally on board with you being there, it makes it a lot easier to justify what you're doing.
I can see that.
Yeah.
But how does this whole human influence thing connect to the focus on Canaan specifically?
Well, think about it. If the conquest wasn't as quick and easy as Joshua says, the Israelites might have needed a stronger reason to be in Canaan. So maybe they emphasized their claim to that particular spot, even though the original promise was for a way bigger chunk of land.
So they kind of narrowed the story to fit their situation.
It's definitely a possibility. The historical and political stuff going on when they were writing these texts, it suggests that maybe their own motives and ideas kind of shaped the narrative.
Interesting. But we still haven't talked about the big theological question. If the promised land was really God's plan, why would he promise land that was already full of people, like people who had been there for ages with their own civilization and everything?
Oh yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It's one that's been debated for centuries, and there's no simple answer that everyone agrees on. But let's look at some different ways people have interpreted this whole promised land idea.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit. What are some other ways to think about it?
Well, some people say that the promised land isn't about a real place. Like, maybe it's more of a metaphor, a spiritual destination, a state of being in harmony with God.
Oh, so it's not a spot on the map, but like a state of mind, a spiritual journey.
Exactly. This interpretation sees the whole story of the Israelites traveling to Canaan as a metaphor for the human search for meaning, you know. It's about struggling, overcoming challenges, and ultimately finding your place in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, yeah, I get that. What other interpretations are there?
Another one focuses on the idea of the covenant. Remember, God's promise to Abraham wasn't just about land. It was also about having lots of descendants and being a blessing to all nations.
Right. Land, descendants, and a blessing to everyone. The three big promises.
Exactly. And some scholars say that people have focused too much on the land part and forgotten about the other two. They think the real promise was for Abraham's descendants to, like, share their blessings with everyone, spread goodness and wisdom, not conquer and kick people out.
So instead of saying, this land is only ours, they were supposed to share whatever was special about them with the whole world.
Yeah, that's the idea. This interpretation lines up with a lot of other religious teachings about universal love and compassion. It's more about being connected to everyone than dividing up the land.
That's a really powerful message, especially when you think about what's going on between Israel and Palestine today.
Totally. It makes you rethink the idea that one group has the right to the land and everyone else has to go. It suggests that we need to understand each other better, be kind to each other, and remember that we're all human.
I like that. So we've got the metaphorical interpretation and the covenant interpretation. But hey, we can't forget about the other big religious texts that came out of this region. What about the New Testament and the Quran? What do they say about this whole promised land idea? Do they back up the idea that it was meant just for the Israelites, or do they offer a different take?
That's where it gets even more interesting. Both of those texts actually challenge the traditional interpretation we often hear. They focus more on a universal message of love, compassion, and justice for everyone.
So let's start with the New Testament. Does Jesus ever say that Canaan belongs only to the Israelites? Or does he have a different vision?
Well, everything Jesus taught was about love, compassion, and breaking down walls between people. He never said that one group gets to own the land just because of some promise from God.
So no, this land is ours and not yours kind of talk.
Nope, not at all. His message was all about including everyone, not excluding people. He talked about loving your neighbor, even your enemies, and being kind to everyone, no matter who they are.
So Jesus isn't exactly endorsing a land grab. What about the Quran? Does it say that the promised land belongs only to the Israelites?
The Quran acknowledges that the Israelites were in the region historically, but it doesn't say that God gave them exclusive ownership. It emphasizes justice, compassion, and respect for all people, no matter their religion or ethnicity.
So both the New Testament and the Quran are kind of pushing back against the idea that God gave Canaan to the Israelites and nobody else. They're saying something more universal and inclusive, something about being human together and living peacefully.
Exactly. They're challenging the idea that God plays favorites and encouraging us to find common ground based on shared values and fairness for everyone.
Okay, so where does this leave us? We've really dug into this promised land narrative, questioned the usual interpretation, and looked at other perspectives from different religious texts. It feels like we've taken the whole thing apart. But what do we do now? What do we build in its place?
That's the tough part, right? We can't just erase history or pretend these stories don't matter. But we can look at them with a more critical and nuanced understanding. We can recognize that humans were involved in writing them, and that their historical and political situation probably played a role.
We're not saying the Bible's wrong or anything, are we?
Not at all. We're just saying that religious texts are complicated. They were written in specific times and places, and they might reflect the opinions and biases of the people who wrote them. It's about reading between the lines, considering different interpretations, and realizing that our understanding of these texts can change over time.
So it's about looking deeper and grappling with the real meaning of these stories.
Exactly. And when we do that with the Promised Land narrative, it opens up new ways of understanding the relationship between the Israelites, the Canaanites, and the land itself.
So instead of seeing it as a winner-take-all situation, we can look for an interpretation that's more inclusive and harmonious, one that acknowledges the complexities of history and recognizes that we're all connected.
Precisely. We can focus on the shared history, the common ancestry, and the possibility of everyone living together peacefully.
We talked about how the Canaanites might be the ancestors of modern-day Palestinians. Does that change how we see the conflict that's happening there now?
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to an already complex situation. It challenges the idea that this is just a fight between two totally separate groups who both think they own the land. It suggests a deeper, more intertwined history, one that's rooted in shared ancestry and a long and complicated relationship with this particular piece of land. Welcome back to the show. It's been quite a journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has. We've been digging deep into this whole promised land idea.
Right. Looking at the history of Canaan, how that connects to the Palestinians today.
Yeah, and we've seen that the biblical account, while important, isn't necessarily the whole story.
Exactly. There might be some human agendas and interpretations woven in there.
For sure. And we also explored how other religious texts, like the New Testament and the Quran, offer a different perspective.
Right. They focus more on that universal message of love, compassion, justice for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So where do we go from here? What does this all mean for us today, especially when we think about the situation in that region?
Well, it definitely makes things more complicated than just a simple God gave us this land kind of narrative.
Absolutely. There's so much nuance to consider.
Yeah.
And recognizing those nuances is really important, especially given the tension and conflict that's still going on there. Because the idea of the promised land has been used by some to justify claims of exclusive ownership, often at the expense of others.
Exactly. And like we saw, the biblical narrative itself is more complex than that. The promised land that's described in Genesis was much larger than just Canaan. Plus, even the Bible gives different versions of how the conquest happened.
Right. So it's not this clear-cut black and white story. And when you factor in the Canaanites' history there, maybe even as ancestors of the Palestinians today, it adds a whole other layer of complexity to who has a rightful claim to the land.
You know, it's funny. Most people, when they think ancient civilizations, they think Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Pyramids, pharaohs, all that. But the Canaanites, they were building complex cities like Jericho, long before the pyramids were even a twinkle in some pharaoh's eye.
It's true. Tel es Sultan, the modern name for Jericho, is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. It's got to tell you something about how far back these people go. We're talking almost 10,000 years.
And that's what I love about this material you sent. It really forces you to rethink what you thought you knew about ancient history. You know, most folks, they picture the Canaanites as this single group, mentioned in the Bible, but it was way more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's like saying everyone in Europe is the same. You've got different countries, different cultures, different languages. And it was the same with the Canaanites. They were a collection of city-states and tribes spread across a huge area, what we now know as Palestine, Lebanon, parts of Jordan, and even into Syria.
Absolutely. And understanding that diversity, it's crucial, right? It helps us avoid oversimplifying things, especially when you're looking at historical narratives that have been, used to justify all sorts of things over the years.
Okay, so we've got this vibrant mix of people, the Canaanites, with this super long history. But one of the things you sent really dives into the biblical narrative. The story of Abraham, the Israelites coming to Canaan, that whole concept of a promised land. That's some heavy stuff, right?
No doubt. And your source, it raises some interesting questions about the timeline. The Bible, it puts the Israelite conquest of Canaan around 1200 BCE. But as we've been talking about the archaeological evidence, it shows the Canaanites were there much, much earlier, thousands of years earlier.
So how do we square those two accounts? Was it a peaceful migration, gradual assimilation, or was it something more confrontational, like some interpretations suggest?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The source material, it really digs into the possible biases and the historical context surrounding these biblical accounts. It encourages us to think critically, like who was writing these stories, when, what were their motivations? It's not about, dismissing these texts outright. It's about understanding them as products of their time, shaped by, politics, society, religious agendas.
Which leads to another question. If a civilization lasts for 9,000 years, and the source makes that point about the Canaanites, it wouldn't just disappear, poof, overnight, right? There's got to be some kind of continuation, some legacy.
You're exactly right. That kind of longevity suggests an echo through generations, and that's where the idea of the Canaanites as the forefathers of modern-day Palestinians becomes so fascinating.
Okay, so explain that connection for me. What kind of evidence is there to support that idea?
Well, more and more research is showing that the Canaanites' cultural heritage, it's woven into the very fabric of Palestinian traditions, customs, even language. There are threads of continuity that stretch back millennia, connecting the ancient past to the present. Like imagine a tapestry, right? Those ancient threads, they're still visible even after centuries of layering and weaving.
Wow, that's a powerful image. Makes you realize history isn't just dates and events. It's about people, their stories, their cultures.
Yeah.
How those elements endure, even when there are attempts to, erase them or suppress them.
Exactly. And when we acknowledge that connection, we're not erasing other narratives.
Right.
We're actually enriching our understanding of how complex the region truly is.
Let's circle back to Jericho for a second. We talked about Tel el-Zon, that it's continuously inhabited, one of the oldest places in the world. What makes that so significant? What does it tell us about the Canaanites?
Well, think about it. It's not just about how old the city is. It's about what's buried beneath the surface, layers upon layers of history. And what the archaeologists are finding at Tel el-Sultan, it gives us tangible evidence of a thriving Canaanite civilization. We're talking massive walls, burial practices, distinctive pottery, even signs of their religious beliefs.
So we're not just talking about ideas here. We're talking about physical artifacts, things you can actually hold in your hand that go back thousands of years. What kind of stuff are they actually finding? Give me an example.
Okay, well, take the shaft tombs they've uncovered. These weren't just empty graves. They were filled with personal items buried alongside the deceased. Imagine finding intricately crafted pottery, delicate jewelry, weapons even, all carefully placed with the dead. This tells us that the Canaanites believed in, equipping their loved ones for a journey to the afterlife. It's a window into their worldview, their beliefs about life and death.
It's like you're holding a piece of their culture, their beliefs, their very existence in your hand. It brings history to life in a way that a textbook just never could. But then we have the biblical narrative, which, as we've discussed, presents a different perspective. And one of the sources you shared really tackles the theological implications of that narrative.
Yeah, and this is where the conversation gets really interesting and challenging. The source, it delves into that idea of God promising land to one group, but at the expense of another. Raises some tough questions about justice, fairness, It asks us to consider whether certain biblical verses were meant to be taken literally or if they served a different purpose in their historical context.
It's a tough concept to wrap your head around, especially for those who view these texts as, sacred, divinely inspired. How do you reconcile that idea of divine favoritism with those values of compassion and mercy that are so central to so many religions?
That's a question that's been debated by theologians and scholars for, centuries, really. The source doesn't provide easy answers, but it does encourage us to look at these biblical accounts within their historical and cultural context, to consider alternative interpretations that prioritize those very values: compassion, mercy, a sense of shared humanity, rather than, justifying conquest or displacement.
So it's about reading these texts with a critical eye,
Hmm?
recognizing that they were written by humans with their own agendas, worldviews, and understanding that even within sacred texts, there can be multiple layers of meaning and interpretation.
Exactly. And sometimes those interpretations can be used to support narratives that are, well, ultimately harmful or unjust. That's why it's so important to engage with these texts critically, to question our assumptions, and to, seek out those alternative perspectives.
Speaking of biblical verses, one of the sources actually zooms in on some specific passages that are often cited to support that idea of a promised land, right? It mentions Genesis 12.7, 15.1 and 21, and 17.8, along with Exodus 3.8 and 6.4.
You got it. Those verses are often at the heart of a lot of theological debate about, land ownership and historical claims. And your source, it poses this very provocative question. What if those verses weren't actually divine words? What if they were influenced by human authors with their own agendas, shaped by the political and social realities of the time they were written?
Wow. That's a really interesting idea. It challenges us to rethink how we approach these texts, to acknowledge that there's potential for human bias, even within, scriptures.
Yeah, and it opens up a whole new way of understanding those texts. Were these authors trying to, legitimize a conquest, justify certain actions, promote specific ideologies? These are questions worth exploring because by understanding the motivations behind the words, we gain a deeper understanding of the texts themselves.
It's like peeling back the layers of history, revealing those complexities, contradictions, the things that often get missed when we accept narratives at face value.
And it reminds us that history, it's rarely straightforward. It's a tapestry woven from multiple threads, each with its own story to tell. And that's where language, the study of language, becomes so important. You see, language isn't just about words. It's about culture, identity, a whole way of seeing and understanding the world.
Okay, I'm with you. But how does language tie into this whole story of the Canaanites and their possible connection to the Palestinians?
Well, your source material, it highlights this really fascinating linguistic link. It points out that the Canaanite language, which was part of the Semitic language family, it's considered a precursor to both Hebrew and Aramaic.
Wait, hold on. Remind me. What's the Semitic language family again? I feel like I should know this, but...
No worries. It's easy to forget these things. Basically, it's a group of languages that originated in the Middle East.
Yeah.
It includes Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Canaanite. So we're talking about a deep linguistic connection that goes back, like way back.
So the languages spoken in that region today, they have roots that go all the way back to the Canaanites. That's wild.
It is. And the source, it argues that this linguistic connection, it offers even more evidence of the Canaanites' enduring legacy, like their language, their way of communicating, even their thoughts and ideas. They've continued to influence the region long after their civilization, as we traditionally understand it, kind of declined.
It's like these linguistic echoes, just reverberating through time, shaping the way people speak and think today. Makes you wonder about all those unseen connections that tie us to the past.
Right. And get this, the source points out that modern-day Palestinian Arabic, it actually shares some really striking similarities with ancient Canaanite. We're not just talking about theoretical connections, but actual words and phrases that have survived, for thousands of years.
That's amazing. It's like finding linguistic fossils embedded in the language spoken today. It must be like a treasure hunt for linguists and historians.
Oh, absolutely. They can trace the evolution of language, see how words have changed and adapted over time, and really gain a deeper understanding of how cultures have interacted and influenced each other. And it underscores a point we made earlier, right? The Canaanites didn't just vanish. Their legacy, it lives on in the languages spoken in the region today, in those cultural practices, in the very fabric of Palestinian identity.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about, kings and queens and wars. It's about the everyday lives of people, their languages, their stories, and how those elements, they can endure even when someone's trying to, erase them,
Yeah, got it. And that brings us to, a kind of sensitive but important topic, cultural appropriation.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's something the source addresses head on, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about the Canaanites and their connection to the Palestinians.
Yeah, and for good reason. Because when we talk about the Canaanites as the possible forefathers of the Palestinians, it kind of bumps up against those attempts to erase history, to rewrite it, to fit certain narratives,
Okay, help me understand this. What do we mean by cultural appropriation in this context?
Well, in this case, it's about those attempts to claim or co-opt the history and heritage of the Canaanites, but for purposes that often exclude or marginalize the Palestinians. It's a way of disconnecting them from their own ancestral past.
So we're talking about like rewriting history to fit a particular agenda, often a political one.
Exactly. And the source actually gives some examples of this. It mentions how some try to portray the Canaanites as this completely separate and distinct group from the Palestinians, almost as if they have no connection to the land or its current inhabitants.
That's like saying the ancient Romans have nothing to do with modern-day Italians. It just doesn't make sense.
It's absurd, right? And these attempts to rewrite history, they have real-world consequences. By erasing or downplaying that potential Canaanite connection to the Palestinians, it becomes easier to justify claims to the land based on other narratives. It's easier to dismiss Palestinian history and culture, to tell stories that devalue their presence and their claims.
It's like a way to undermine their connection to the land, weaken their claim, their sense of identity.
Precisely. And that's why this source you sent, it's so important. It pushes back against those attempts at cultural appropriation. It provides a more, grounded, evidence-based account of the Canaanites and their possible connection to the Palestinians. It's about reclaiming history, giving voice to those who've been silenced, and recognizing that continuity of culture and heritage that stretches across generations.
But it's not about saying that cultures are static or frozen in time, right? Cultures evolve, they change, they interact, they influence each other.
Right, that's a crucial point. The source acknowledges that cultural exchange and influence are going to happen. Cultures evolve, they adapt, they take on elements from other cultures. It's a natural process.
So there's a difference between, natural cultural exchange and those deliberate attempts to erase or co-opt someone else's history for political gain.
Big difference. And that distinction, it's critical, especially when you're dealing with a region as complex and as contested as this one.
So when we talk about the Canaanites and their possible connection to the Palestinians, we need to be aware of those power dynamics. Who's telling the story? Whose voices are being amplified? And whose perspectives are being, marginalized or silenced?
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's not just about what happened in the past. It's about how those events are being interpreted and used in the present. What are they being used to support?
It reminds me of that quote, history is written by the victors. But through archaeology, through linguistics, by really examining those traditional narratives, we can start to uncover those hidden stories, those silenced voices. And maybe, just maybe, we can contribute to a more, balanced and truthful understanding of the past.
You've hit on something really important. It's about acknowledging that history is messy. It's complex. There are multiple perspectives. And those perspectives often reflect power dynamics, competing narratives.
It's recognizing that history isn't just a bunch of facts and dates. It's a story. And that story is often told from a particular point of view. And by seeking out multiple perspectives, by listening to those voices that have been marginalized, silenced, we can start to build a more complete and a more nuanced understanding of the past.
Exactly. It's about challenging those dominant narratives, asking critical questions, and seeking out evidence from a variety of sources. And sometimes those sources can be found in the most unexpected places, like the language people speak, the artifacts they leave behind.
Speaking of artifacts, I know one of the sources you sent, it goes into detail about the archaeological evidence found at Tel Sultan and other sites in the region. It talks about finding pottery shards, bronze weapons, tools, even clay tablets with Canaanite writing on them. These discoveries, they seem to challenge some of those traditional interpretations of the region's history, don't they?
Absolutely. They provide tangible proof of a sophisticated and thriving Canaanite civilization that existed long before that time period that's often associated with, the Israelite conquest.
It's like these artifacts, they're giving voice to the Canaanites, allowing them to tell their own story, a story that's often been, overlooked or overshadowed by other narratives.
And that story, as we're seeing, it's a story of resilience, adaptability, cultural continuity. It challenges those simple narratives, and it forces us to rethink our assumptions about the past and how it's connected to the present.
Okay, let's talk about those artifacts. What about the pottery shards? I understand they date back to the early Bronze Age, which would put them around 3000 BCE. That's way before the traditional timeline for the Israelite conquest.
Exactly. And those pottery shards, they're not just random broken pieces of clay. They're often decorated with intricate designs and motifs that are, specific to Canaanite culture, like little pieces of art that give us a glimpse into the aesthetic sensibilities of the people who made them, their artistic skills.
It's like holding a piece of their culture, their creativity, their very essence in your hand.
And what's even more remarkable is that they're found in layers of earth that predate that period that's traditionally associated with the Israelites. It challenges that whole notion that the Canaanites were, a primitive people, undeveloped. These artifacts, they tell a different story. A story of skilled artisans, complex social structures, and a vibrant cultural heritage that thrived for centuries.
Like the archaeological evidence is pushing back against that narrative that's been told for so long, a narrative that's often been used to justify certain claims and actions.
It reminds us that history is not always what it seems. There are often multiple layers to the story, and those layers can be revealed through, careful examination and a willingness to question our assumption.
And it's not just pottery. The source mentions they found bronze weapons and tools that tell as Sultan II, also dating back to the early Bronze Age. What can you tell me about those?
Well, these bronze artifacts, they're another piece of the puzzle. They show us that the Canaanites weren't only skilled artisans, but they were also pretty technologically advanced for their time. They could produce sophisticated weapons and tools, things that were essential for, their survival and for developing as a society. They were farmers, metalworkers, traders. They had this complex and dynamic culture that was really interwoven with the land and its resources.
They're not just artistically talented, but technologically savvy, too. They weren't just getting by. They were innovating, thriving.
Yeah.
And yet their story, it's often been, pushed aside, marginalized.
Right, and that's why these archaeological findings are so crucial. They give us that tangible evidence that challenges those dominant narratives and offers us a more, nuanced, complete understanding of the past.
This is where my inner history nerd really gets excited. It's like a detective story, piecing together those clues from the past to, uncover the truth. And the source mentions another clue. Clay tablets with Canaanite writing on them. Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah. These clay tablets, they're like ancient documents. They give us a glimpse into the Canaanites' thoughts, beliefs, daily lives, like windows into their world, their language, their culture.
It must be incredible for researchers to be able to, decipher those ancient writings, cracking the codes, unlocking those secrets from the past.
It is. And what's so cool about these written records is that they provide firsthand accounts, written by the Canaanites themselves. It's not filtered through some other culture's lens or, historical narrative.
They're hearing their voices directly, reading their words, connecting with them on a much more personal level. It makes them human in a way that those traditional accounts often don't.
You get it. And those voices, they tell us that the Canaanites were a literate, sophisticated people, capable of complex thought, communication. They had their own systems of writing, their own literature, their own unique ways of expressing themselves.
So not just skilled artisans, metal workers, but literate too, capable of recording their history, their ideas. It's a far cry from the image that's often presented of them.
Totally. And it challenges that notion that they were somehow primitive or backward. The evidence shows us something much more nuanced, much more complex. And we're just starting to see that picture emerge as we dig deeper into the archaeological record.
And one of the points the source makes is that this is just the beginning. There's so much more out there to discover, so many sites that haven't even been excavated yet, so many secrets still waiting to be revealed.
It's true. Archaeology is a process. It's ongoing. And as we keep digging, keep analyzing the evidence, who knows what we'll find? We're likely to uncover even more fascinating insights into the Canaanites, their culture, their history, and their legacy, which continues to this day.
It's exciting to think about what the future holds, what new discoveries are waiting for us, and how those discoveries might challenge our understanding of the past and how it connects to the present.
It is, and I think that's one of the most powerful things about archaeology. It has the power to rewrite history, to bring those hidden truths to light, and to give voice to those who've been silenced for far too long.
It's about reclaiming the past and giving it back its rightful place in our collective memory. And by doing that, maybe we can create a more just and equitable understanding of the world today.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing the complexities of history, challenging those dominant narratives, and embracing the richness and diversity of human experience. It's amazing how archaeology can make the past feel so alive, And one of the things that really struck me from your source material is how it emphasizes that the Canaanites, they weren't just passive bystanders. They weren't just swept aside by history.
Totally. They were innovators, creators. They shaped their world. And they left a legacy that we can still see today. It's almost like their fingerprints are all over the region.
That's a great way to put it. Their innovations, their contributions to different fields, they really show how ingenious and adaptable these people were.
Okay, give me some examples. What kind of innovations are we talking about here?
Well, the source, it credits them with developing some pretty advanced agricultural techniques. Things like irrigation systems, crop rotation, those were game changers, especially in a region that's often struggled with, water scarcity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Having reliable ways to manage water to keep the soil fertile, that's essential, right? Not just for survival, but for building a whole civilization.
Exactly. These agricultural innovations, they allowed the Canaanites to not just survive, but to flourish. They could produce extra food, a surplus, and that surplus, it helped their cities grow, their culture to thrive. It's like they were laying the foundation for the agricultural practices that would sustain that whole region for centuries to come.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how those innovations might have spread, influenced other cultures.
Yeah.
How that knowledge, that ingenuity might have rippled outward and shaped the entire ancient world.
It really is. And it wasn't just agriculture either. They were also skilled sailors, traders. They had this whole maritime culture that connected them to different parts of the ancient world.
So they weren't isolated. They were actively trading, exchanging goods and ideas with other civilizations.
Oh, yeah. Imagine these bustling port cities, alive with the sounds of trade, people from all over, Canaanite ships loaded with cedarwood, olive oil, precious metals, sailing all the way to Egypt, Mesopotamia. They weren't just getting by, they were thriving, connecting the ancient world through commerce.
It makes you wonder about the stories those sailors could tell, the places they saw, the people they met. They were really at the crossroads of the ancient world.
Absolutely. And through those interactions, they were exposed to all these new technologies, ideas, cultural influences. They absorbed and adapted while also sharing their own innovations and perspectives. It was a vibrant exchange, one that enriched the whole region.
A reminder that cultures don't just exist in a vacuum, right? They're constantly evolving, adapting through these interactions and exchanges.
Precisely. And speaking of cultural achievements, we can't forget about the Canaanites' contributions to art and architecture.
All right. We talked about the pottery styles earlier. What else can you tell me about their artistic legacy?
Their artistry, it took many forms. The source mentions their jewelry, intricately crafted, often made from precious metals and decorated with beautiful carvings and gemstones. Imagine, delicate gold necklaces with these tiny figurines that represent their gods and goddesses, or rings engraved with symbols of their beliefs.
It's incredible. It's amazing to think that some of those pieces might still be around today, hidden away in museums or private collections, these tangible connections to that ancient world.
Oh, there are some amazing pieces that have been preserved. They allow us to see the Canaanites' artistic skill, their aesthetic sense, and their architecture. It was just as impressive. The source mentions those massive walls of Jericho, a marvel of engineering for that time.
Yeah. We talked about those walls earlier. It's hard to imagine how they built something like that without modern technology.
Right. It really shows their ingenuity, their organizational skills. Building something on that scale, it would take an odd ton of planning, coordination, manpower.
And those walls, they weren't just about defense, were they? They were symbols, weren't they? Symbols of the city's strength, wealth, cultural identity. A statement of their presence, their influence.
You got it. They were leaving their mark on the landscape, creating structures that would last, inspire awe for generations to come.
The source also mentions how important it is to understand the Canaanites' religious beliefs, their practices. This is an area that's often misunderstood or even misrepresented.
Yeah, you're right. The Canaanites, they were polytheistic, meaning they believed in multiple gods and goddesses. And each deity had specific roles, powers. They represented different aspects of nature, human experience, the cosmos. And their beliefs, they were woven into everything, every part of their lives.
So it wasn't just about rituals or ceremonies. Their beliefs, the influence their agriculture, their social customs, their whole understanding of the world around them.
Absolutely. Their worldview, it was holistic. It was part of everything they did, everything they were. And as the source points out, those beliefs were often misunderstood by other cultures, sometimes intentionally distorted to fit certain narratives.
It's a reminder that we have to be careful when we're trying to understand the beliefs of other cultures. It's easy to misinterpret, even demonize what we don't understand.
It is. The Canaanites' religious beliefs and practices, they were just as valid, just as meaningful as those of any other culture. And they played a huge role in shaping their society, their identity, their understanding of the world.
It's interesting to think about how those beliefs might have evolved over time, how they might have influenced other religions in the region.
The source actually mentions that some scholars believe there are connections between Canaanite beliefs and practices and, those of later religions, including Judaism and Christianity. This idea of a shared religious heritage, a kind of cultural cross-pollination that goes beyond time and cultural boundaries.
It reminds us that religions aren't static. They're not isolated. They evolve, they interact, they adapt, they borrow and integrate ideas.
That's it. It's this complex, fascinating tapestry. And it challenges us to look beyond our own beliefs and recognize that shared humanity that connects us all, across cultures throughout history.
This deep dive, it's been an amazing journey. From the ancient walls of Jericho to the intricacies of language, religion, cultural exchange, we've explored the innovations, the challenges, the enduring legacy of the Canaanites.
And I think one of the most important takeaways here is that the Canaanites, they weren't just some footnote in history. They were a complex, dynamic people who left a mark on the world that can still be felt today. Their story is still being written as we discover new evidence and reinterpret their place in history.
And by acknowledging their story, their achievements, their possible connection to the Palestinian people, we can start to understand the complexities of this region in a much deeper way.
It's about recognizing that interconnectedness of past and present, culture and identity, the many threads that weave together the fabric of human experience.
Thank you so much for sharing these amazing sources with me, and for joining me on this journey through time and knowledge.
It's been my pleasure. And to you, our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep digging deeper. The past is never truly gone. It lives on in the stories we tell, the connections we make, and the understanding we seek.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be going way back in time today, like thousands of years. Archaeology, history, even a little theology, all about the Canaanites. And trust me, this isn't just some dry history lesson. You shared some really fascinating material on these folks.
Yeah, it's funny. Most people, when they think ancient civilizations, they think Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Pyramids, pharaohs, all that. But the Canaanites, they were building complex cities like Jericho, long before the pyramids were even a twinkle in some pharaoh's eye.
It's true. Tel es Sultan, the modern name for Jericho, is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. I've got to tell you something about how far back these people go. We're talking almost 10,000 years.
And that's what I love about this material you sent. It really forces you to rethink what you thought you knew about ancient history. Most folks, they picture the Canaanites as this single group, mentioned in the Bible, but it was way more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's like saying everyone in Europe is the same. You've got different countries, different cultures, different languages. And it was the same with the Canaanites. They were a collection of city-states and tribes spread across a huge area, what we now know as Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, parts of Jordan, and even into Syria.
Absolutely. And understanding that diversity, it's crucial, right? It helps us avoid oversimplifying things, especially when you're looking at historical narratives that have been used to justify all sorts of things over the years.
Okay, so we've got this vibrant mix of people, the Canaanites, with this super long history. But one of the things you sent really dives into the biblical narrative. The story of Abraham, the Israelites coming to Canaan, that whole concept of a promised land. That's some heavy stuff, right?
No doubt. And your source, it raises some interesting questions about the timeline. The Bible, it puts the Israelite conquest of Canaan around 1200 BCE. But as we've been talking about the archaeological evidence, it shows the Canaanites were there much, much earlier, thousands of years earlier.
So how do we square those two accounts? Was it a peaceful migration, gradual assimilation, or was it something more confrontational, like some interpretations suggest?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The source material, it really digs into the possible biases and the historical context surrounding these biblical accounts. It encourages us to think critically, like who was writing these stories, when, what were their motivations? It's not about, dismissing these texts outright. It's about understanding them as products of their time, shaped by, politics, society, religious agendas.
Which leads to another question. If a civilization lasts for 9,000 years, and the source makes that point about the Canaanites, it wouldn't just disappear, poof, overnight, right? There's got to be some kind of continuation, some legacy.
You're exactly right. That kind of longevity suggests an echo through generations, and that's where the idea of the Canaanites as the forefathers of modern-day Palestinians becomes so fascinating.
Okay, so explain that connection for me. What kind of evidence is there to support that idea?
Well, more and more research is showing that the Canaanites' cultural heritage, it's woven into the very fabric of Palestinian traditions, customs, even language. There are threads of continuity that stretch back millennia, connecting the ancient past to the present. Like imagine a tapestry, right? Those ancient threads, they're still visible even after centuries of layering and weaving.
Wow. That's a powerful image. Makes you realize history isn't just dates and events. It's about people, their stories, their cultures.
Yeah.
How those elements endure, even when there are attempts to, erase them or suppress them.
Exactly. And when we acknowledge that connection, we're not erasing other narratives.
Right.
We're actually enriching our understanding of how complex the region truly is.
Let's circle back to Jericho for a second. We talked about Tel el-Zon, that it's continuously inhabited, one of the oldest places in the world. What makes that so significant? What does it tell us about the Canaanites?
Well, think about it. It's not just about how old the city is. It's about what's buried beneath the surface, layers upon layers of history. And what the archaeologists are finding at Tel el-Sultan, it gives us tangible evidence of a thriving Canaanite civilization. We're talking massive walls, burial practices, distinctive pottery, even signs of their religious beliefs.
So we're not just talking about ideas here. We're talking about physical artifacts, things you can actually hold in your hand that go back thousands of years. What kind of stuff are they actually finding? Give me an example.
Okay, well, take the shaft tombs they've uncovered. These weren't just empty graves. They were filled with personal items buried alongside the deceased. Imagine finding intricately crafted pottery, delicate jewelry, weapons even, all carefully placed with the dead. This tells us that the Canaanites believed in, equipping their loved ones for a journey to the afterlife. It's a window into their worldview, their beliefs about life and death.